Well, folks, our own Prime Minister was one of the featured speakers yesterday at the Regional Crime Symposium, where he went into, to some extent, what he thought was the reasons for crime. And he wasn't completely biased for his own party's history in their role as leaders of the country during their times in office. However, he had some interesting things to say with regards to the source. Let's take a listen to cue this.
And by 2022, the annual count was over 600, a new record, already being challenged by the murder rate for 2023. Except for COVID in a pandemic, none of the listed dangerous diseases have taken lives like this, and that in medical care and attention. All of these are frequent, daily incurred costs, and they are to be borne by taxpayers at every level, from scarce revenues diverted from other more deserving, productive priorities. In the political arena, some believe it's all about having the right national security minister. Others share the epiphany of separating the Ministry of National Security into fragments of Homeland Security and Defense. I wish it was that simple. In recent years, we, Trinidad and Tobago, had 10 ministers of national security sourced from career politicians, including that of Prime Minister. The military and the private sector had one minister who served for 7 unbroken years, grappling with the upsurge of violent crime and insufficiency of policing. A succeeding administration, the UNC, in a 5-year term, had 5 national security ministers with junior assistants, with tenure ranging from a few months each to 2 years. This current administration, PNM, has had 3 ministers in 8 years. And the one indisputable fact in all these musical chairs is that the violence has not abated. It has in many instances increased and become even more cynical. Clearly, the problem does not exist and grow because of a shortage of ministers or even ministerial output. Ladies and gentlemen, just look at media reports. They appear to be telling us that across the region, territories are under siege from the acts of crime and violence from elements of our own society. Just minorities who are today creating larger atmospheres of fear, despondency, trauma, surrender, and hopelessness among all of us. This is a battle in which we must all be engaged. This is a war that we cannot afford to lose. In this engagement, governments are open to uncomplimentary charges of, some say, indifference, others say impotence, unimaginative planning, discrimination, abdication of duties, poor leadership, and with the repeated calls for resignations. Old talk is cheap. That crime and violence are now a major part of the Caribbean's overall plethora of problems. When such a situation arrives at the door, it is said that there was a failure of the society to stop the oncoming crisis. Then there may be a later failure to perceive the extent of that arrived situation as a societal problem. Further, there may be problems of finding solutions, and whether the solutions selected may even succeed. Today, if there's one aspect that we all may be guilty of, is that the problem of criminality and violence was not dealt with sufficiently in a much earlier time frame. In the homes, in the schools, in the prisons, in the courts, and I dare say, in the parliaments. There was what could be described as, quote, a creeping normalcy, unquote. We allowed slow, moderate, deviant behavioral trends to increase. We allowed slips in our age-old standards, in ethical and moral norms in our family homes, in our schools, in public institutions, on our roads, and in public places. All of which, hindsight reminds us that we should have checked very early. Instead, we seem to have been saying that these times are different. This is the age of American gun culture. As we adopt the internet revolution with its tremendous promises and all its warts, an age of selfish individualism has been allowed to flourish at the expense of the society itself. So morals and values are now considered flexible. Their lines are blurred, and they occupy spheres of their own, determined and shaped by one's personal whims, the present, fashionable social trends, and worse, the political and bureaucratic shortcomings of something malleable called the system.
That was the Prime Minister yesterday at, near the start of the regional symposium. And, of course, his entire contribution was 16 minutes. You could get the other 2/3 if you check it out on YouTube. I, to some extent, recommend it. But to focus in on one main observation I had, he acknowledged that there were issues with society, and that could be one of the root causes of crime, which is stuff that a lot of people have said. And to some extent, I agree with that. Not too sure if he's going to disagree. Notice he didn't necessarily talk about the economic situation that we're currently in, because the Minister of National Security did not agree with that point. But it seems as though while he's acknowledging society's failures and government's part to play as, the elected leadership of society, the direct efforts of the political leadership, the Minister of National Security, etc., National Security Council, is implied. To me, it's almost like if he's trying to figure out a way to reduce that blow, or to say, to outright say, no, it's not really Minister of National Security fault. We've tried all these different combinations and nothing has worked. And I feel as though he understands the problem a lot. You can't say that he is ignorant of what's going on. But I also feel as though he doesn't have like a worldview or an ideology that will account for all the factors. They're all still separate, different things that he's thinking about. And you can't just treat it as separate, different things in silos. You have to account for everything. So while society could be the cause of crime, to some extent, ineffectual leadership, we can't just discount that. Just because everybody essentially failed, that's what he's saying. That doesn't mean that it's not their fault. Sorry, just because the results were bad with everybody, that doesn't not necessarily mean that everybody has failed. I would argue to say that all of the ministers of national security for the last 20 years have not been able to do enough to clamp down on this.
You see, there are two sides. I'm trying to be fair to the Prime Minister. There are two sides to that speech, his opening speech. One, okay, great, self-criticism. I'm acknowledging that in the last 8 years, I've had 3 ministers and we've not seen a change in the situation. I'm also suggesting that in the 5 years that the United National Congress were in power, they had 5 ministers, and nothing seemed to change or get better from there. But if we focus on his period, and if we focus on his political speech, before I mentioned it last week Friday, he himself has said that if a government cannot focus on the issues of crime, paraphrasing here, by the way, they are part of the problem as well. So self-criticism, okay, great, good. The next aspect, whilst you have stood on a platform and done that, in your own words, old talk is cheap. Mm-hmm. Because at the same time, I'm looking in the mirror and criticizing constructively the position that, listen, it's not just a matter of government ministers. It's beyond that. You've actually not done anything beyond that, right? So if you are suggesting that this is the case, what's the point of having a Minister of National Security?
Yeah.
Precisely, what is the point? You, to me, in that entire speech, you've made an argument against having a Minister of National Security. So there is no point in me having that position. There's no point in an individual stating that. You said where other resources can be utilized. Good. Remove that, remove the salary, remove the benefits, and that money could benefit something or some other entity somewhere else. At the end of the day, I can appreciate what the Prime Minister was trying to allude to, but I can also point out you have not done anything about it at all. So, we'll talk is cheap.
I think, first of all, police is less than 50% of the national security budget. I don't understand why we spend over 50% on other things, except maybe administration, intelligence, and those sorts of things. Fine. Do we need Defense Force and Coast Guard that isn't contributing anything to the situation? That's enough. That's significant, in my opinion, except for more also. But I think the point that you raised where he said, well, a government that isn't, what was the paraphrase? I don't want to misquote.
Government who cannot recognize the problem or who does nothing about it is part of the problem.
Did he say that specifically about crime?
He said it was specifically about crime. The exact words, obviously, because
once it was specifically about crime, because therein ultimately lies the point. He cannot be right now and right then. Because there he's saying government has a responsibility, and now he's saying, well, look, some will say that we have been negligent and this and that, and look, it doesn't matter which Minister of Security, it's not about us, it's about society. And to some extent, how much is he acknowledging government's role as leaders in society, and how much is he separating government from society?
Society will take lessons from its leaders. And usually how it goes, society looks up to its leaders. And if society today is the problem, and I acknowledge that society today is a part of the problem, then based off of what I've been taught growing up, the kinds of leaders, society today, and what society is today, only translates the kinds of leaders that we have in Trinidad and Tobago.
I as much as I like the song Bring Back the Old Time Days, I think we look at the old times being so much better and morally better and ethically better, and people were nicer. Times were simpler, but I think we underestimate just how much nicer society was, right? If you go back through history, both recent and distant, they have a lot of less than savory characters, not just in crime, but also in politics.
You see, Trinidad is sweet. Trinidad used to be sweet.
It's just, I say that when he talks about, the internet and modern society.
No, Trinidad used to be sweet. It still is sweet, but it used to be sweeter. And it could be even sweeter. The issue with Trinidad and Tobago is we don't help ourselves. We don't do anything to help ourselves. And I cannot say that I am inspired by any leader from any political ring, and it's very difficult to, there are leaders within society, but they do not get the spotlight that they deserve.
We don't help ourselves, and that predates the internet and any influence that might give.